On June 4th, longtime residents of Yulongting community in Xinzhou City, Shanxi Province, gathered at the sales office in a rage, some beating their heads and others shouting loudly. The reason was that the developer announced a significant drop in the community's housing prices. On the evening of June 3rd, the prices suddenly fell from nearly 7,000 RMB to 5,000 RMB per square meter, causing those who had bought houses just a day before to lose 300,000 RMB overnight. Some homeowners who had purchased homes only a few weeks earlier saw their property values drop by hundreds of thousands of RMB. This was undoubtedly a heavy blow for them, so they went to the sales office to demand an explanation. The Yulongting project is located north of Yunzhong River Park in Xinfu District and is considered Riverview property. It was once dubbed the pinnacle of Xinzhou's real estate market, with 200 units in the first phase. The current price drop is for clearing out the remaining units of the first phase. In recent years, China's economy has been in continuous decline, with a severe real estate crisis causing housing prices to plummet across small and medium-sized cities nationwide. In many cases, prices have fallen below 1,000 RMB per square meter. For example, in the Xiaohuayuan district of Zhangjiakou City, which is considered a suburb of Beijing, the average house price has dropped to 12,000 RMB per square meter to 8,100 RMB per square meter over the past 3 years, a decline of one-third. Prices as low as 1,100 RMB per square meter, about $15 per square foot. In Jilin City, Jilin Province, the price of a 2-bedroom apartment fell below 1,000 RMB per square meter 4 years ago. In March of this year, a 45 square meter 1-bedroom unit sold for 20,000 RMB, equivalent to 500 RMB per square meter. In Shenzhen, a first-tier city, the speed at which housing prices have fallen has exceeded expectations. It seems that almost overnight, the entire Shenzhen real estate market's trend changed, with many people eager to sell their homes, even at a loss. Currently, more than 100,000 second-hand homes are listed for sale in Shenzhen, not including those on judicial auction. That means that about 1 in 10 Shenzhen owners are trying to sell their property. For instance, at Moon Bay Garden, during the housing market peak, the transaction price was close to 100,000 RMB per square meter, but now it has dropped to 40,000 RMB. Losing 4 to 5 million RMB on a property is now common. The key issue is that even at 40,000 RMB, the homes aren't selling. Many similar communities exist. Homeowners who bought at high prices are now abandoning their properties, choosing to stop payments and forfeit their down payments. Describing it mildly, their family wealth has shrunk. In more severe terms, it has led to family ruin. Similar situations are occurring in more than 10 provinces, including Hunan, Shanxi, and Sichuan. Even in economically developed Guangdong Province, cities like Jieyang, Heyuan, and Qingyuan have seen housing prices drop to around 1,000 RMB per square meter. According to a recent report by Real Estate Research Center, the average price of second-hand homes in various cities continued to fall in May, with first-tier cities experiencing a 6th consecutive monthly decline. The average prices in 100 key cities monitored by the center have been falling for 15 consecutive months on a month-to-month basis and for 17 consecutive months on a year-to-year basis. Despite the Chinese government's ongoing efforts to introduce policies to boost the real estate market, they have not reversed the downward trend. Recently, China's top 3 real estate companies by sales, Poly Developments, and China Overseas Land and Investment, reported their performances. From January to May this year, their sales contract accounts fell by 33%, 39%, and 40% respectively year-on-year. Additionally, Country Garden, which ranked first in sales in 2022, saw its sales amount drop by a staggering 84% year-on-year from January to May. In addition to declining sales performance, Chinese real estate companies face significant debt repayment pressure. According to the China Index Academy, the total amount of bonds due for real estate companies in 2024 is 770 billion RMB, indicating a persistently high overall scale. The real estate industry is characterized by long industrial chains and many related sectors. On one hand, real estate development activities are closely tied to construction activities, directly consuming large amounts of building materials, thereby driving the development of cement, steel, glass, hardware, ceramics, chemicals, and other manufacturing industries. On the other hand, housing-related consumption activities promote the development of home appliances, furniture, home textiles, and other manufacturing sectors. Moreover, real estate development and sales have a strong effect on logistics, finance, and other tertiary industries. A research report by Southwest Securities estimates that in 2020, the total driving effect of China's real estate industry was approximately 1.71. This means that for every unit increase in the real estate industry's output, the overall industry output would increase by 1.71 units. Furthermore, the real estate sector can significantly impact employment across more than 50 related industries, accounting for over 28% of employment. This indicates that the real estate industry's economic added value contributes to roughly 30% of employment absorption capacity. Over the past 20 years, real estate has undoubtedly been China's pillar industry. Economist Ren Zheping calculated that from 2000 to 2022, the contribution of the real estate industry to GDP growth fluctuated upwards from 4.8% to 13.9%. According to the World Bank, if supply chain inputs are considered, the real estate sector accounts for about 30% of China's GDP. The real estate industry is crucial to China's economy, with all economic sectors, including finance, deeply intertwined with it. The collapse of this sector could potentially trigger an economic meltdown. To understand the prospects of China's economy, let's analyze the three main driving factors: investment, consumption, and exports. Investment and consumption together account for about 80% of GDP, and both are closely linked to real estate. Let's look at the data. China's GDP began to grow rapidly from the year 2000, coinciding with the urban housing reform. The rapid development of the real estate sector boosted investment and housing consumption. After the urban housing system reform in 1998, China entered the era of commercial housing. Since then, real estate development and investment in mainland China have grown at a high speed, with growth rates surpassing those of fixed asset investments during the same period. In 2001, the growth rate reached 27.3%, and it climbed to 30.3% in 2003. Alongside the construction of a large number of residential buildings, housing prices soared quickly. Over the past 20 years, the average housing price in China has increased from over 2,000 RMB per square meter to over 10,000 RMB per square meter, a 400% increase. In terms of GDP proportion, fixed asset investment, primarily driven by real estate and infrastructure, grew from 34% to 43% over the 20 years, while the consumption share dropped from about 47% to 37%. Typically, household consumption accounts for about 60% of GDP. For example, during 2013 to 2022, high-income countries averaged 59%. Other middle-income countries, including China, averaged 61%. India averaged 60%, and Vietnam averaged 57%. To maintain such consumption levels, household disposable income needs to account for 60 to 70% of GDP. Consumption is the driving force of the economy, and the core of consumption is the income of the people. China's problem is low household income and high debt, leading to insufficient consumption capacity. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, the proportion of disposable income to GDP in China is about 40 to 45%. In developed countries like the United States, Germany, and Japan, the ratio is generally 60 to 70% or higher. The disparity means that, given the same economic output, Chinese residents share a smaller proportion of economic benefits. Since the housing reform, Chinese household debt has grown rapidly. From less than 10% of GDP before 2006, it gradually increased to over 63% in 2023. The real estate debt of urban Chinese households reached 137.9% of their income. According to recent data from CEIC, as of January 2024, Chinese household debt exceeded $11 trillion, a 50% increase compared to 5 years ago. A significant portion of Chinese household income is used to repay mortgages. The real estate sector in China acts like a massive wealth-absorbing beast, draining the wealth of Chinese households and suppressing consumption. The driving force behind this is the local governments. In China's total housing value, 70% consists of land and tax costs. Through real estate, the government has essentially funneled the wealth of Chinese citizens into its own coffers. Independent commentator Cai Shen-kun stated in a post on June 7th that the series of real estate rescue policies introduced by the Chinese government in May were clearly aimed at saving the government and banks without considering the interests of homebuyers. The article pointed out that over the past few decades, The government has driven up land and housing prices to gain huge profits, with banks issuing almost all loans tied to real estate, amounting to more than 240 trillion RMB. These loans are secured with property as collateral. If the loans cannot be repaid, the number of foreclosed properties will increase, which will lower housing prices and the value of the collateral. This will necessitate additional collateral or cash, causing many families and businesses to face bankruptcy. To promote housing consumption, the Chinese government has taken several specific measures, such as lowering down payment ratios, reducing mortgage interest rates, and having the government purchase some inventory housing. However, according to statistics from January to May, these measures have not been effective. Consumption is the ultimate demand and the starting point and driving force of economic growth. For any mature, developed country, consumption is the primary driver of economic growth. China's problem, however, is weak domestic demand, fundamentally due to the lack of money for people to spend. While both real estate and consumption are weakening, the Chinese government is also tightening infrastructure investment. At the beginning of the year, the State Council issued a directive requiring 12 provinces, including Liaoning, Guangxi, and Guizhou, to strictly control new government investment projects. These include transportation, highways, subways, light rail, municipal projects, industrial parks, and shantytown renovations. Projects with a total investment completion rate of less than 50% are to be delayed or stopped. Projects with a completion rate above 50% but facing major issues cannot continue. Even Shanghai has been asked to suspend approvals for shopping malls, office buildings, industrial and research and development projects. Infrastructure has long been a significant part of China's economy. In 2023, investment in China's infrastructure sector reached 23 trillion RMB, accounting for 18% of GDP. The primary reason for halting such a large industry is the high debt levels of local governments. According to 2022 data from the International Monetary Fund, China's local government debt had already reached 92 trillion RMB, accounting for 76% of GDP. Economic expert Dr. Cheng Xiaonong wrote in Radio Free Asia on February 27, 2023, that the total debt of China's central and local governments is as high as 110 trillion RMB, equivalent to 91% of GDP, far exceeding the internationally recognized warning line of 60%. Dr. Cheng believes that the local governments in China are unlikely to repay their debts. He warned that if the massive debt problem is not resolved, China will face a comprehensive and extremely severe economic disaster. Thus, both of China's major investment fields, real estate and infrastructure, are in decline. The export situation in China is also not optimistic. After the outbreak of COVID-19, the CCP's strict lockdown measures reaffirmed to the international community the true nature of the regime, reminiscent of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. The international community has seen how the CCP ruthlessly crushes basic rule of law, democracy, and freedom. Policies under the CCP can change unpredictably, making China an unreliable production base. As a result, many international companies like Samsung, Foxconn, and Apple have moved their supply chains out of China. The Chinese government has used forced labor and subsidies to enhance the competitiveness of its products in international markets, leading to the dumping of low-priced goods. These include Huawei products, steel, aluminum products, and electric vehicles. In the US and Europe, this practice has faced backlash. Multiple economic indicators show a sharp decline in China's exports after a brief rebound earlier this year. According to data from the General Administration of Customs, China's exports in March fell by 7.5% year-on-year, and imports decreased by 1.9%, resulting in a trade surplus of $58.5 billion. All three figures were below economists' expectations. U.S.-based economist Li Hengqin stated that while the proportion of exports has fallen, the total volume has reached a new high, indicating that China's strategy of low-price dumping in the global market continues. He explained, "Unit prices have dropped and other costs have decreased, allowing for a higher total amount. However, profits have decreased, especially in service exports, so there is no substantial benefit to the Chinese economy." Xie Tian, a professor at the University of South Carolina's Business School, stated that China's low-price dumping could exacerbate international trade tensions, leading to trade barriers against Chinese imports in the affected countries. He said the CCP is heavily subsidizing the electric vehicle industry to shift excess capacity and unemployment. The EU and US are blocking Chinese electric vehicles, which will pose a significant challenge in the coming months. Professor Xie also noted that the electric vehicle industry, promoted as a new pillar of productivity by the Chinese government, could face high tariffs from external markets due to government subsidies and dumping issues. This raises doubts about whether the new energy sector can truly drive China's economic recovery. Economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, Tian Chen, stated that the sharp drop in export prices could drop down China's GDP for the entire year. In May, the official manufacturing PMI fell from 50.4 in April to 49.5, dipping below the 50 mark that separates growth from contraction. Associate professor at Nanhua University in Taiwan commented, "This indicates a contraction in manufacturing and reflects problems such as weak demand and overcapacity." Alibaba's chairman, Zhou Zai, previously pointed out that the fundamental reason for insufficient domestic demand in China is the sluggish real estate market, leading consumers to oversave and reduce consumption. Additionally, restrictions on private enterprise development and rising unemployment further hinder consumption. China is experiencing an unprecedented quadruple slump stock market, currency market, real estate market, and bond market. On April 10th, Fitch Ratings downgraded the credit outlook of the Chinese government to negative. In this context, many professional institutions and economic experts, including the International Monetary Fund, have recommended that the Chinese government adopt policies to provide practical and direct assistance to Chinese consumers and increase their consumption by stimulating economic growth. However, the Chinese authorities have so far refused to adopt these measures. Many observers believe that the Chinese government's reluctance to boost consumption and economic growth stems from strong political resistance. Earlier, Chinese leader Xi Jinping had published an article stating that promoting common prosperity should not involve welfare. Regarding why the CCP has not taken more robust measures to save the economy, Scott Kennedy, an expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, summarized 4 commonly held views. The CCP leaders are unaware of the real economic situation. They do not understand how to manage the economy. They do not care about economic well-being, or they are obstinately opposed to economic rescue measures. Kennedy conducted field research in China this spring and interviewed many people. He reported that many interviewees lean towards the view that the CCP leaders are unwilling to save the economy. Some respondents believed that the CCP leadership made a strategic mistake by betting on controlling future technologies and adopting large-scale industrial policies. The CCP leadership also proposed developing electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar panels to boost foreign trade exports. However, these products already face significant overcapacity issues. With weak domestic demand and low prices, the only remaining outlet for the expanded capacity is the overseas market. This overcapacity issue coincides with the collapse of China's vast real estate sector, which has suppressed demand for steel and other building materials. However, the new industrial sectors cannot support 25% of GDP, which is what the real estate sector contributed to the Chinese economy. A netizen on social media commented, "All these market rescue policies and funds are aimed at saving developers and local governments, not the people. On the contrary, they are figuring out how to make you take out the money in your pockets and take on decades of debt." Kennedy warned that any of these scenarios could trigger a major economic crisis. Such an economic crisis could potentially evolve into a political crisis, sparking internal factional struggles within the CCP and possibly leading to public protests and attempts to overthrow the CCP entirely.